Hi guys, welcome back. You have an organ in your body that weighs about 1.5 kilograms, contains more cells than your entire human body, produces neurotransmitters that influence your mood every single day, and most doctors never mention it in a standard checkup. It's not your brain, it's not your heart, it's not anything you learned about in school. It's the microbiome. And scientists are now calling it the organ you didn't know you had. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover what the microbiome actually is and why researchers only recently began understanding how powerful it truly is, the four neurotransmitter systems it directly influences, including dopamine and serotonin, why a disrupted microbiome has now been linked to depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, and addiction in peer-reviewed research, the concept of psychobiotics and what that term actually means in the scientific literature, and exactly what the research says you can do to protect and restore this hidden organ starting today. Let's get into it. Your body contains roughly 37 trillion human cells, but living inside your digestive tract right now are an estimated 38 to 100 trillion microbial organisms, bacteria, fungi, viruses, and archaea, collectively forming what scientists call the gut microbiome. For most of medical history, these microorganisms were largely dismissed as passengers, hitchhikers along for the ride in your digestive system, occasionally causing problems when the wrong ones multiplied, but fundamentally irrelevant to anything beyond digestion. That understanding has been completely overturned in the last decade, and the pace of discovery has accelerated so dramatically in the last few years that Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience, one of the leading journals in neuroscience research, described the microbiome-brain connection in 2025 as one of the most rapidly expanding frontiers in all of modern medicine. Here's what almost nobody knows about what's actually happening inside you. Your microbiome doesn't simply sit in your gut processing food. It communicates actively and constantly with your brain, your immune system, and your endocrine system, the network of glands that controls your hormones through at least four distinct biological pathways operating simultaneously. The first is the vagus nerve, the direct neural highway running from your brainstem to your gut that we've discussed before. Microbes in your gut produce chemical signals that travel this pathway directly to your brain, influencing neural activity in regions responsible for mood, memory, and stress response. The second is immune system signaling. Your gut microbiome is in constant dialogue with your immune system, regulating inflammatory responses throughout your entire body. When microbial balance is disrupted, this communication breaks down, and systemic inflammation, including neuroinflammation in the brain, can result. The third is endocrine signaling. Your gut bacteria actively produce and influence hormones, including short-chain fatty acids, that regulate metabolism and communicate with the brain directly through the bloodstream. And the fourth, and this is the one that surprises most people most, is direct neurotransmitter production and modulation. Your gut microbiome directly influences four of the most important neurotransmitter systems in your brain: serotonin, dopamine, GABA, and glutamate. A comprehensive review published in the journal Nutrients in October 2025, analyzing peer-reviewed research from PubMed, Scopus, and Web of Science, synthesized the current evidence on exactly how this works. The review found that gut microbiota modulate serotonin pathways, which regulate mood, social behavior, and appetite. They modulate dopaminergic pathways, affecting motivation, reward, and drive. They influence GABAergic systems, the brain's primary inhibitory network, directly connected to anxiety and emotional regulation. And they affect glutamate signaling, the brain's main excitatory neurotransmitter, involved in learning and memory. Four of the most critical neurotransmitter systems your brain depends on for emotional stability, cognitive function, and behavioral control, all being actively modulated by trillions of organisms living in your digestive tract. But here's where most people get this completely wrong. Most people, if they've heard of the microbiome at all, think of it as a digestion thing, something that matters for bloating and gut health, something you improve by eating yogurt occasionally. The research that has emerged in the last few years makes that understanding seem almost prehistoric, A 2025 review published in the journal Life from researchers at the Fondazione Policlinico Universitario in Rome examined the latest findings specifically on how microbiome disruption, called dysbiosis, affects brain function and behavior. The findings were striking. Dysbiosis has now been associated in peer-reviewed research with depression, generalized anxiety disorder, impulsivity, cognitive decline, and addiction. The review concluded that a balanced microbiome appears to be genuinely essential for healthy brain function, not just beneficial, but essential, and that microbial disruptions contribute directly to cognitive deficits, mood disturbances, and neuroinflammation. This is not theoretical. This is peer-reviewed evidence from multiple independent research groups across multiple countries, converging on the same conclusion. But here's what changes everything about how you should think about this. In January 2026, a systematic review published in Frontiers in Psychiatry specifically examined the long-term effects of what researchers are now calling microbial therapeutics, i.e., deliberate interventions that target the microbiome to treat psychiatric disorders. The authors analyzed evidence on probiotics, dietary interventions, and fecal microbiota transplantation, specifically for their effects on mood disorders and quality of life. The review concluded that the field has moved beyond proof of concept. Multiple interventions targeting the gut microbiome are showing measurable, statistically significant effects on psychiatric symptoms, effects sustained over the follow-up period studied. The researchers called for the integration of microbiome research into standard psychiatric practice. This is the point at which the science stops being a fascinating curiosity and starts being something that should directly change what you do every single day. There's a term that's now embedded in the scientific literature that's worth understanding: psychobiotics. This term was coined not by supplement marketers but by researchers within the peer-reviewed literature to describe live organisms or microbe-derived substances that, when consumed in adequate amounts, produce measurable mental health benefits through their action on the gut-brain axis. The name itself tells you something important about how far this field has come. We now have a scientific category, with peer-reviewed research behind it, for beneficial microorganisms that specifically target your mental health. Now there's a critical and important distinction the evidence makes clear, and I want to be honest about it. The research distinguishes between approaches that have real solid evidence behind them and approaches that remain preliminary. Probiotic supplementation shows consistent, if modest, effects, particularly multi-strain formulations, which consistently outperform single-strain products in clinical trials. Dietary interventions have some of the strongest and most consistent evidence, because what you eat is the primary driver of which microbial species thrive in your gut and in what balance. But fecal microbiota transplantation, the transfer of a healthy donor's gut microbiome into a recipient, while producing some dramatic results in specific conditions, is still in early research phases for psychiatric applications and is not something to attempt outside of a clinical setting. The practical evidence that applies to you, starting today, is more straightforward than the cutting-edge interventions. Diversity is the single most consistent finding in microbiome research. People with more diverse gut microbiomes, meaning more different species in more balanced proportions, show consistently better outcomes in both physical and mental health measurements than people with lower diversity. And microbiome diversity is directly shaped by dietary diversity. The wider the range of whole, plant-based, fiber-rich foods in your diet, the greater your microbial diversity tends to be. Fermented foods introduce live beneficial bacterial strains directly. Research on fermented food consumption, yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, tempeh, shows consistent microbiome diversification benefits in controlled studies. A landmark Stanford study found that a fermented food diet increased microbiome diversity while simultaneously reducing inflammatory markers over a 10-week period. Processed food and high-sugar diets do the opposite. They selectively feed bacterial species associated with dysbiosis and inflammation, while starving the species associated with healthy neurotransmitter modulation and immune balance. The connection between ultra-processed food consumption and microbiome disruption is one of the most consistently documented findings in this field. Chronic stress directly alters microbiome composition. The gut-brain axis runs in both directions. Just as your microbiome influences your stress response, chronic activation of your stress response, sustained elevated cortisol, reshapes which bacterial species dominate your gut. This creates a feedback loop where chronic stress degrades the microbiome, and the degraded microbiome then amplifies the stress response. Antibiotics deserve specific mention, not because you should avoid them when genuinely needed, but because the research on their microbiome effects is sobering. A single course of broad-spectrum antibiotics can reduce gut microbiome diversity by 25 to 50%. Recovery to previous diversity levels can take months, and some studies suggest certain changes may persist for years. This doesn't make antibiotics wrong to use. Sometimes they're essential and life-saving, but it does mean that when they're prescribed, the case for actively supporting microbiome recovery through diet and specific probiotic use afterward is well evidenced. Let me bring everything together. The microbiome is not a digestion accessory. It is a genuine functional organ, one that weighs more than your brain, contains more cells than the rest of your body combined, and participates actively in regulating your mood, your stress response, your immune system, and your cognitive function every single day. Research published in 2025 and 2026 has moved this from an emerging hypothesis to an established finding. Dysbiosis is now directly linked to depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, and addiction in the peer-reviewed literature, and interventions targeting the microbiome are producing measurable psychiatric benefits in clinical trials. 4 neurotransmitter systems, 4 communication pathways, trillions of organisms whose balance or imbalance is being shaped right now by everything you eat, every source of chronic stress you carry, every course of antibiotics you take, and every diverse or uniform meal you put on your plate. The real question was never just, is my gut healthy? The real question is, are you taking care of the organ that is quietly taking care of your mind? If this changed the way you think about your own body, subscribe, because next week we go even deeper into the systems controlling your health that most people never think about. See you in the next one.